Psychologists of Reddit, what made you realize you were treating a psychopath? When telling that, he kept thinking about how killing people would be more fun than lame animals, stray cats and dogs and everything else he could catch. Only 11 years old. Clinical psychologist here. At first I didn't know. If anything, given the context, he was more put together than most of my patients. The subject of his criminal past came up. I only knew he had served prison time some years before, not what he was in for. I had met with him a month or two when this came up. Turns out it was 2 separate sentences served. Both were for rape. In both cases he was the exact thing we are afraid of, a guy lurking in a dark alley jumping a drunk girl. He too. Current psychologist working in a prison here. I've worked with 3 individuals I dare say would have met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder within the last 2 weeks. One commonality is that they use behaviors as tools to benefit only themselves. Self-harm not because they wish to hurt themselves but to use it as a tool to lure staff into the cell to incite violence, gain extra medication, be sent to the SHU which comes with the status. When I was a student we had an interview with a lady that killed her baby child with a handgun because it cried so much that she couldn't take it. At first we weren't told that she was a psychopath, and we were just told to listen to her side of the story. She was reading us from her journal that she made while she was in the institution. Not once did she mention that she was sad that her baby died, or how what she did was bad. She was just reading angry thoughts about her husband that left. My mum worked with a boy 12-13 at the time who had killed animals. He raped a sheep then cut its throat. He molested his younger brother. He was big for his age and wouldn't he be allowed to be alone with female staff because he would always try to manipulate them and test his strength against them in subtle ways, i.e., he tried to hug them but squeezed to see if they were strong enough to get out of it. They would often find drawings in his room of women tied up and mutilated. He wasn't I'm on to you, OP. Manipulate the psychologists into telling you how to avoid being caught out. Classic psychopath maneuver. Imagine the brain that thinks someone will be understanding about the murder of 1 child, but offended by the murder of 2. So bizarre. How do you treat someone in that scenario? And how likely is it to help them long term? How do you distinguish between lack of guilt and something being talked to death? I imagine, in and out of prison twice for rape, you weren't the first person to ask him about it. Were there other red flags? Often there is a particular face they make when they are relating a story, usually about how clever they are. One of the TED Talks on how to spot a liar calls it duping delight. Sometimes they can't contain their rage and you see them switch. Edit. Last sentence is a personal observation not related to the TED Talk. Edit. To add link. We had to watch it for our criminology class. As other posters have noted, there is no evidence-based way to spot a liar. I just found the duping delight phase. Not a psych, but I was in the room where my mum was being evaluated. Well, I wasn't in the room. It was like a police interrogation room with the one-way glass. I was there because they needed to interview me for an outsider's perspective. Anyways, my mum got arrested on suspicion to commit a violent crime. To set the scene, she was handcuffed to a table, and she was pissed. She's always had volatile anger issues due to heavy drug and alcohol use. She was being talked to, questioned, all this OT. Very normal-looking person. This always makes me think about how many people like this I have interacted with up to this point in my life. You feel it in your gut first. Using a validated measure, and constructing a thorough case history to discuss in supervision, this is how you test your gut feeling. But you feel it often quite quickly. It tends to begin with just a sense that something is off. When you're doing therapy with someone, we tend to build up quite a strong rapport with people. So there's lots of micro-mimicry going on, and you start to tune in quite deeply to unconscious body language. When you're in this STA, if he was lonely and wanted someone to talk to, is it really sinister that he would get you a chair so you would hang around longer? Just seems like something anyone might do. Psychopaths be in here talking notes on how to not get caught. And I'm on to you, trying to undermine OP and make him self-doubt, in your never-ending drive to manipulate and control others. Not a psychologist, but a nurse who sees way too many psych cases. One time I had a point who was brought in after trying to break into a family's house while they were home. He was on my telemetry unit because his electrolytes were out of whack and he was acting like he didn't remember trying to bust into an entire family's house with them home. He was getting antsy, but the hospital I worked at had a stupid fall risk policy that kept patients in bed, even if they were young, healthy, capable of. Not a psychologist, but from my experience of dating a psychopath, didn't know until years in. A lot of what appears as emotion is simply mirroring emotions they see others exhibit, and how they believe is the socially appropriate way to respond, whether or not they actually feel that way. This is how they blend in and appear normal to the average person. They are narcissistic, and everything revolves around them. They are always able to place blame on other people, nothing is ever their fault. Okay, so what's the difference between psychopathy and narcissism? People seem to be only focusing on how most psychopaths are narcissistic, but they're not really mentioning anything else. I'm autistic, and because of my very low empathy, I come across as mildly psychopathic. However, I have very low self-esteem. I do not manipulate people, as far as I can tell. My former roommate, on the other hand, was a narcissist to a trash steep T, to the point where she abused and manipulated me. Plot twist, it was a psychopath who wrote the question in the first place. Twist twist, it was you. What measures do you take to ensure your safety? If some of the people you are treating are psychopathic murderers, do you have a way of protecting yourself in case things get nasty? I read that the lack of empathy in autism and the lack of empathy in psychopathy are actually different things. I can't remember the specific terms used, but it was something like cognitive empathy versus what we would think of as real empathy. Understanding versus feeling. A psychopath would have high cognitive empathy, meaning they can read what other people are feeling, but low real empathy, meaning they can't feel it themselves. This means they can do what they need to make someone feel what is. Whoa, were you treating someone who was already in jail? Or trying to get information out of him to convict him? I'm just really curious. What do you do in these circumstances? Like, can the psychopaths be positively affected by any kind of therapy in a way that can actually change them? The eyes when they believe they're supposed to put on an emotion. You have to understand. It's going ouch when you bang your funny bone, even though it doesn't hurt, because all your life, people have cried out in pain when they've banged their elbow. You meet enough people like that and you find yourself hating any obligational situation in your life when you have to lie, like being asked how you are and saying good when you're not, simply because all you can associate it with is them. Sometimes they can't contain their rage and you see them switch. I've watched the TED Talk and it doesn't mention this. Could you elaborate on this sentence? Why rage when it is delightful? Anyway, it sounds pretty interesting. A good saying I heard went something along the lines of, "You never truly know someone until things don't go their way." If you don't mind me asking, how do you deal with a patient when they get to that stage? Do you try to de-escalate in some way? I'm not a psychologist, but I know a few, have studied it extensively, and my sister works with MH in the police. He told me he tried to care how people feel, but he doesn't know how that would even come about. How do you know you care for someone? How do you not feel indifferent? He just said he has 3 emotions: indifference, anger, and pity. Not a psychologist, but I read a story about a neurologist that did a brain scan on himself and found out he was a psychopath. Oh my. Sorry to hear that. I'm glad you were able to turn out okay. What a nightmare. I typed out a long response to this but then deleted it because I couldn't really describe it without giving too many details away. One thing I will say is that psychopaths aren't all your classic murderous criminals. Sometimes the nicest people you'll meet are psychopaths, and it's all an act to manipulate you to do what they want, or think a certain way about them, because that makes them feel like they've won and or are superior to you. Watch out for the nice guys. I'm kind of impressed it took until you knew his history to get that primal fear feeling. Was surprised this summer when a student showed up to my office to talk to me after a few phone calls. He was a new student, we had never met before, but he was getting some things ready in anticipation to start. Yeah, on the phone he was slightly off, maybe spectrum or maybe socially anxious, but not my job or degree to diagnose or worry about. Student shows up to my office and all my senses are set. I used to work for a lady and her husband, who I'd bet money is a psychopath. His little daughter had a nasty accident that required brain surgery and facial reconstruction. He filmed the whole ordeal starting from moments after her fall up to bringing her home and uploaded it to YouTube. In the video after her surgery, she is sleeping and her mom is sitting vigil by her side. They are quietly talking and her mom let out a little giggle, which I didn't find that odd. I mean, her daughter was I. He wrote a terrible, immoral book about it. His wife was not surprised if I recall correctly. I'm awake at 5 a.m. reading this now. I won't get any sleep, thanks for that. I just double-checked all my windows and doors. There is so much misinformation in this thread. Lots of people who have clearly spent too much time watching Criminal Minds and reading Wikipedia pages. You technically can't even diagnose psychopathy, at least clinically. The PCLR, which people have mentioned, cherry-picked as a list of the traits commonly seen in psychopaths, and is not conclusive, as many people can display these traits and not be a psychopath as such. The very model of the traits of psychopathy is reductionist. Do you think it's possible for children to be psychopaths, in very rare cases? Because in my work I have met at least one child for sure who I got that primal fear feeling with, and he also showed no remorse for anything. Saw him feel very sad for his own life circumstances, which were pure hell, but no remorse for his own actions that hurt others at all. Of course, the school did not have a counselor because there's never any mental health issues in kids raised in poverty by addict parents. Or just turning the tables by asking who's the maddest person you've ever treated. TIL Reddit OPs are the real psychopaths. I say ouch when I get hurt in a video game or someone punches a table unpredictably. This thread is interesting, so I thought I'd contribute. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a criminologist. Obviously it's not the same sort of thing and I've never been in a clinical situation, but you might be interested in some related experiences. Note here that I'm going to be very careful with my language in order to maintain professional integrity. Apologies for the stilted language. I've been to a couple of prisons for academic stuff and work. These are not actually all that interesting. I had one and it was so bizarre and haunting. I was doing a psych evaluation on a tween. I think he was like 12 years old, and was in the early stage of doing the clinical interview with him and his mother. The mother described various acts of violence the child had done in addition to other things, and I listened to the child's explanations of why. After I walked them out of the office, I remember talking to a colleague that this was the first time I had encountered a sociopath in the making. This is my experience with the only one I have known, in high school. She was a very superficial person, and I don't mean she liked makeup and fancy things, I mean every interaction was very surface level. After knowing someone for years you expect to know a little about their internal life, but not her. I heard about everything she bought, the drugs she done, remember, high school, boys and what they done, never what she felt about it. Every conversation felt like she was listy. The best way to know for sure is to sit down with a psychologist and tell them, without reservation, about your life and the way you experience the world. If you're more interested in self-diagnosis, although I would advise against it as it's entirely meaningless due to self-deception and bias, there are plenty of resources available online. You could easily find a copy of the DSM-V with 5 minutes or less of online searching. If you're looking for personal experiences which align with you. Correct, they do not see the need. I'll let you in on a psychiatry secret. Once we figure out someone is a genuine psychopath actually lacking empathy, we do our best to exclude them from psychotherapy. Why? Because a lot of psychotherapy is about learning how to interpret and explain emotions of both yourself and others. And psychopaths don't use that information to better themselves. They instead use it to become better manipulators. If you naturally feel little or no guilt or remorse so the real psychopaths are the friends we've made along the way. Therapist here. A good sociopath will, on the surface, seem totally invested in treatment. They kind of schmooze you, try to impress you. Then eventually you catch on that they're manipulating you to think one way while they're totally behaving opposite of what you think. Also, if you're an empath and really pick up on people's moods, vibes, sociopaths, psychopaths just give you a big gut feeling that something isn't right. You almost feel slimy after talking to them. That's my XP. I did debate in college and my partner was like this. Handsome, charismatic, popular around campus. He was always very cheerful and friendly, but I found him very frustrating the longer I knew him, because he never seemed to listen to me and would sometimes make stupid mistakes as a result. There were a handful of times when I chewed him out, and he never had a legitimate emotional response. He just gave these cold, empty assurances. It's hard to describe exactly, but after a few months of KN. This is extremely well written. I am not a mental health professional, but I am a physician. I obviously do not see all of the typical cluster B defense mechanisms to the degree you do, but I see subtle forms of almost every example you've listed from patients quite regularly. I am a mental health professional working in corrections max security facility. In my experience, psychopaths will have this predatory stare, especially when they are trying to manipulate you. It is completely unnerving and hard to describe to someone unfamiliar with this population. They also tend to be narcissistic and overly charming, making a point to be overly friendly with you. Why wouldn't a psychopath try to get mental health treatment? Don't they think they don't need it? The DNNIS system. You can have low self-esteem and still be manipulative. See borderline personality disorder. It's great fun. Weary face. The difference is that autistic people have problems recognizing feelings in others, and psychopaths have problems feeling feelings. Social feelings like empathy, affection. It may be difficult for you to recognize in my face, body language and voice that I am feeling sad or offended or bored, but if I tell you, oh, I have also had an abusive person in my life and they did this thing or that, then you can hear that. Think about what that would be like for you. Perspective taking. I'm not sure if he was a confirmed psychopath. I didn't interact with him long consistently enough to find out for sure. I was introduced to G at a party. He was dating a friend of mine who I went to uni with, who we'll call M. I hadn't seen her for a while. We're both good friends with another friend, A. I was hosting a party and M and G were there. I was introduced to G, and as soon as I went to shake his hand and met his eye contact, I knew something wasn't right. I felt the hair on the. Pretty sure my ex is a good example of one who isn't the brightest bulb in the tanning bed. He is only out because the justice system where we lived refused to do much about it, and he managed to move before things caught up to him. Last I heard, he is still hiding from some of the things he did. I've always wondered how many high-functioning psychopaths are out there. Like people with murderous, rapey impulses, and they are just able to suppress because they know how to function in society. Well, technically psychopaths are more common in an office as managers or similar high positions than prisons. A lack of emotion doesn't make you a violent killer. So after reading a lot of these, it's worth mentioning the following. 1. Psychologists rarely even use the term psychopath anymore. Those disorders which would fall under the umbrella of psychopathy are preferred to the otherwise generic and easily confused term of psychopath. Note how many people frequently conflate psychopathy with narcissism. There is a narcissism personality disorder which fits many models of psychopathy, but not all so-called psychopaths are narcissists. 2. It often do. Why do some of these traits describe me? Not the narcissism or control freak, but the mirroring emotions part. Like, I have no idea how to act in front of unknown relatives. I just think and act according to what everyone else is doing. My dad was required to have court-ordered therapy or something like that when I was little because he deliberately tried to kill someone by running them off the road. The person's crime? Passing him and having a nicer car. My mom and I were in the car at the time. It went from him trying to run the guy off the road to a high-speed chase. Everyone lived. The person he talked to said he likely had ASPD. He had her in tears and she walked out of the room, saying she was unable to help him. IW.